Good morning, everyone. Let's go ahead and come on in, take a seat, and we'll go ahead and get started with prayer requests.
Pray for my mother-in-law. She has cancer.
Yes. We'll get that here in a second. Have to get control first. I know. I need a microphone. Can you? It's working. Good morning, everyone. Let's go ahead and come on in and take a seat. And we're starting with prayer requests as usual. It's good to see everyone here, and what a beautiful Lord's Day we have again, right?
Amen.
I've got a few prayer requests already on the board here, so let's remember B. Little and Gordon, of course, as well as Bob Ward. Bob, it's great to see you here. And also Gene Risley. And I've also added Randall Burton, one of our brothers in Christ that we know through Carolina Bible Camp. And also Dagmar reminds me of her mother-in-law and remind me of her first name.
Diane.
Diane. So Diane Maxwell. Right? So let's remember Diane Maxwell, who also has cancer.
My sister-in-law, Sylvia Stovall, she's still hanging in there.
So Jerry's sister-in-law, thank you for the update you sent earlier on her. Yes.
A friend of mine, Donna Cranford, she's been diagnosed with a brain tumor and is going to have surgery due to the moon.
Cranford, C-R-A-N.
F-O-R-D.
So Donna Cranford, a friend of Peggy's. Yes.
The Ryan family, they're friends of mine, but they also are part of my school community, and they lost one of their sons a couple weeks ago to an accident, a hiking accident.
And how's that name spelled?
R-Y-A-N.
So the Ryan family in the recent loss of their son.
Can you give us an update on Shirley?
Yes, yeah, thank you. Shirley's improvement has been up and down, I would say. And we're thinking that the first injection has worn off. So we have another injection scheduled for Wednesday. The great news is that my sister-in-law is here, and which is a huge blessing. So one step at a time. Yeah.
That's all you do.
Amen. Testing, testing. Jonathan's confident. Okay, it's on. While we're testing out microphones, let's go ahead and take another. I saw another hand. Yes.
I want to ask some prayers for my husband. Today's his birthday, and I'm praying that my life will continue to be a light that, would lead him to Christ, because he's not yet in the body of Christ, and I'm really praying that he will see, this is a blessing, and that he will turn his life over.
That's
His name is Harry Hobson.
first name?
H-A-R-R-Y. Harry
Harry.
Hobson.
So Harrry.
Yeah, Y. H-O-B-S-O.
Harry Hobson. Okay, great. Thank you. So Antoinette's husband, Harry, in his walk toward the cross. Yes. Okay. Sounds like it's working. Great. Thank you, Jonathan. And thank you, Mark, as well. Yes.
I have a
Dagmar.
friend that I'm going to go see in a couple of weeks, Deborah Burns, who has cancer for the third time, and she loves the Lord and is just at peace of getting ready to meet him.
All right, Deborah Burns. So a friend of Dagmar's, Deborah Burns, with third-time cancer. Any others? Yeah, Robin.
My mother-in-law's in a rehab center now. She's there for about 7 days.
So this
I
is,
think they're gonna have to operate on her back because the therapy and stuff is really good on her.
very good.
My father-in-law's got a lot of guilt that she's got her not him, so he's reliving the accident in his mind. And that's pretty good.
So I put down Carter family, right? Carter family. So Robin's mother and father-in-law, following their accident about 10 days ago, maybe, or. Okay, I don't see any other hands, so Andy's going to lead us in a prayer.
Father God, we thank you now. We have some concerns. As we come to you this morning, Lord, we thank you for our family, the health issues with our Robin's mother-in-law, father-in-law, pray for us to do whatever else. Father, we also want to lift up Deborah Burns, her family. We know, Father, that effects of cancer is overwhelming, and we just pray for her as she's going through this journey. To be with her and comfort her and comfort all of her family members and comfort everyone. Father, we also want to lift up this next husband. Father God, we're so blessed with the Christian life that she leads, and we pray, Father, that you is humble. You is humble in the way that Father wants to react to your word, to see the joy, see the hope, see the grace and the mercy that's found in you. I pray, Father, that she continues to lead your life as a Christian, and you is pricking the heart daily. Your mind, every voice within for your kingdom. Father, we also want to lift up the Ryan family who lost their son. I can only imagine the grief and anguish that we went through. I pray that you be with that family now. And also the family and the other staff members at school, and then how it affects them as well. Father, just give them comfort through this time. Father, you know the needs to come, transfer, still be stowed. Diane Maxwell, I want to lift up Randall, especially to you this morning. He's doing a lot better now, but he still has a long way to go. And we just pray for his strength and his health, continue his battle. We also pray for his wife, Teresa, that she's doing everything she can to help take care of him and the household. And we just thank you for her love and care for him. We want to pray for Jean Risley. It's good to hear the news that she's getting better, and we thank you for people like Jerry who are so willing to sit and to care for people and just to show your love to them and help them through the time of need. And also we got Bob Wood who Bob had some health issues and things, and Father God, we just thank you so much for his joy that he has, no matter the difficulties he's facing. He always expresses his joy and his faith in you, and it's such a comfort for us. And we should be comforting him this morning. And comfort us all. Father, as we think about our sister Lee, I know that her journey it's been short so far, but it's been intense. And these moments, this time that we have to be able to sit down and talk with her, we have the opportunity to love on her and to kind of encourage her. Pray, Father, that she will just be with her. thank you. Thank you for the time that we have. And we pray for our brother Lord. We know how much he has the fear of the unknown, fear of what happens next. So I pray, Father, that you can not only pray for thee, but pray for Jordan and the family and the city. And help us through this journey. And Father, the comfort that you give us this time is so overwhelming. It's the encouragement that you do. And God is in heaven. God is in heaven.
Thank you, Andy. We have a lot going on in the life of the church these days. And it's a as we gather in prayer, it's a reminder to me of how much I treasure being part of the family here, in good times and bad times as well. So I spoke with Rob Morey over the week, and he's going to eventually begin teaching this class at some point. It's a little unclear when, but until he begins teaching, I'm going to continue teaching. So we'll get as far through 1 Timothy as we can, and then at some point Rob is going to begin teaching here in the auditorium. And I don't know what lessons he has in mind, but that's the plan over the next few weeks. So this morning we're going to return to where we were last Sunday at the beginning of chapter 3 in 1 Timothy on the qualifications of elders and also on the qualifications of deacons. I mentioned last time that it's a complete coincidence that we're on this topic. Just so happens that of course we're also in the process of appointing new elders. And eventually we hope to be appointing new deacons as well. And so my prayer is that we will think and meditate on these lessons as we continue to try to build up the leadership of the church. Not just in the short run as we look for elders and deacons right now, but in the long run as well. So I know I mentioned last Sunday that this is something that I think we need to all be thinking about, men and women alike. We need to be working diligently to build up future leaders, even if those future leaders are only 2 years old right now. I don't want to embarrass Jonathan, but this reminds me of a time we had a visitor recently. It was a first-time visitor, big tall man, and Titus walked up to him and put out his hand and shook his hand and said, "Good morning, how are you?" And that visitor was overwhelmed. And I thought, there's a future leader. We need more future leaders like that. So kudos to Jonathan and Angie for what they've done already with Titus. Well, so let's turn our attention here to chapter 3. And it begins, "This is a faithful saying. If a man desires the position of a bishop or elder, he desires a good work." So it is a good work. If a man desires this position, that's good, because it is an important and good work. Reading on, you hear about the qualifications. "A bishop then must be blameless, the husband of one wife, temperate, sober-minded, of good behavior, hospitable, able to teach." Let's pause there for a moment. There are quite a few things listed already in this one verse. So notice it says must be blameless. Now, of course, that doesn't mean perfect, because we know that nobody short of Jesus Christ is perfect. So it doesn't mean that we are absolutely sinless. It just means that there's no impeachable character. There's no impeachable flaw. And I think this essentially means that elders need to be of high moral purity. But But it goes on to say the husband of one wife, so overseers or elders are to be men of one woman, and it does imply that it does say that we have to be married. Temperate, sober-minded, of good behavior. So this means that we need to exercise restraint. We need to be cautious in our behavior and our mannerisms and our speech and so forth. It also says hospitable and able to teach. So elders need to be ready and prepared to teach. And that means that's because we're tasked with the responsibility of the spiritual matters of the church. Hospitable is something that we probably don't do enough of. I'm speaking at least for myself. When we speak of hospitality, we often are thinking of having people into our homes, which is definitely a very important aspect. But I would go a little beyond that and to say that hospitality means being welcoming into the church family and being welcoming into the church meeting and the church facilities. As we go through all these topics, let's just remember that they really should apply to all of us. Now, there are, as I said last weekend, there are a few things that won't apply to women, but all of us as Christians should attempt to model these characteristics in any way possible. So we may not all feel as if we are able to teach in a formal manner, for example, but we can all teach at some level. We can all teach by just sharing the gospel, by sharing scripture verses with those we encounter. Okay, reading on, it says, not given to wine, not violent, not greedy for money, but gentle, not quarrelsome, not covetous. So not given to wine. We know that we're going to read, or we have read in Titus, Paul's recommendation, I believe maybe it's in Timothy.
It's Timothy.
Timothy, thank you. So Paul's recommendation to have a little wine to soothe the stomach. One of the things we have to remember here is that in this era, wine referred to something that was much weaker than what we think of as being wine today in terms of its alcoholic content. So yes, this appears to be, it says not given to wine. So in other words, not given over to wine, not allowing wine to control our lives. So I know that there will be some people who will read these scriptures and say, wait a second. Paul recommends moderate use of a little wine. So that says I can drink. Maybe. But notice that Paul's recommendation was really for medicinal purposes. It wasn't for pleasurable purposes. And I would just ask us all to remember that there are people in our midst, certainly people that we encounter on a regular basis, who have a very serious problem with alcohol and who are tempted just by seeing someone take a little bit of alcohol to the point of falling into an alcoholic spiral. And so I think while we may come to the conclusion that the scriptures allow us to partake of a little bit of alcohol, we still need to be careful about those around us and the influence that we can have on them. So I know of people in the church who have had a negative impact on those in their surroundings just by partaking of a little bit of alcohol. So we need to be very, very careful. My approach to this is better not to touch it at all. If there's any concern, why not just stay away from it 100%?
There's one thing, if you don't take that first drink, you'd have no desire to take the second one.
Exactly.
And the New King, not that the New American Standard says not addicted to wine. So, and I know of people I know of a gentleman I used to work with. He had a 13-year-old daughter that became an alcoholic, but he was furnishing the liquor which she was using and didn't even know it. He thought it was hidden where she didn't know it was in the house. She was 13 years old and was an alcoholic.
Yeah, we hear these stories, sadly, we hear these stories over and over and over again. So I think, why create a stumbling block for somebody else? It's just not worth it. So better to just stay away from it completely, I'd say. And the other thing we have to remember is that the alcohol that we speak of today is much, much stronger. There's not really a comparison. This alcohol today tends to be much stronger than what Paul was recommending to Timothy. Okay. I think a lot of the other things that are listed in verse 3 are fairly straightforward and not very surprising. Not violent, not greedy for money, but gentle, not quarrelsome, not covetous. If elders have violence in their personality, if they have greed for money, if they're not gentle, then we can't possibly be good leaders. We can't possibly be good stewards of, for example, the funds of the church. And of course, the Bible tells us not to be covetous. And so, of course, elders should not be covetous. But I would go a step further and say all of us should strive to not be covetous. Then in verse 4, well, okay, let me just pause there. Any questions or comments? Yes, Antoinette.
Question going back to verse 2,
Yes.
where it says that the elder must be the husband of one wife. Should that wife be alive? Or the elder to continue to be an elder? Or if the wife has passed, does that elder has to step down from eldership?
Yes, so Antoinette asks a good question. What if that elder is or what if that man, let's say, is a widower? Then what? And I'm not sure that the scriptures are very clear on that. So here's what I believe a man must do if he, for example, is an elder and his wife passes. Then he needs to submit to the eldership on this. That's my feeling. So, for example, if Shirley were to pass away, I would need to go to the other elders and say, look, brothers, I know what the scriptures say here, that an elder must be a man of one wife. My wife has now passed. What say you? So in matters where the scriptures are unclear, that's why we have elders, so that discretion can be exercised. I would have to submit to the eldership on that, as I have to submit to the eldership on all matters. But I'm not sure that the scriptures are clear. Joshua.
The same thing can be said if a man has, of course, is married to one wife, have believing children, and the children leave the home, and the person was qualified to be an elder, so he's a standing elder, but when the children leave home, children, of course, influenced by peer pressure and outside influences, tend to fall away from the faith. How does he still keep the post?
Exactly. Same sort of question. Yeah. So Joshua points out that there are situations in which a man's children have left the home, are no longer under his influence. They're no longer in the home. He's no longer in a position to rule them in the home. So what happens then if the children have fallen away from the church? There again, I would say that if I were in that situation, I would have to submit to the eldership on it. Yes, Marie.
Referring to what Joshua just said, I didn't hear everything he said, but of course you're getting to that in verse 4 and 5.
Yes.
My question is, on verse 5, where he says, can't manage your own household, how can you take care of the church? Why is Paul making a comparison to the household, a comparison to the church? If when the children are away from home, at what time do they quit being your children? And you've got the church are going to be all believers, they're going to be faithful people. And of course Titus is, first chapter 1 in Titus, verses starting with verse 5, he talks about believe. The King James Version says believing, I believe, and then I looked this up in 3 versions.
Believing children.
One says believing, and the other one says faithful. The New American Standard says faithful. The King James says believing. in Titus. Now, as long as they're at home, they may not be old enough to have become children of God. They may not be Christians.
True.
At what point? And I mean, people say all the time, well, when they leave home, you have no control over them. Well, if you don't have any control over them, what about the members of the church? I mean, to me, it's a real fine line there that people are going to say, I mean, if you came to me and I was not doing what I should be doing, and your children were not faithful, and they were grown, married, whatever, and you're coming to tell me that I'm not being faithful, I'm going to look at you and say, you're going to tell me what to do when your children aren't even doing it?
Sure.
Because you're also supposed to be in good rapport with the people from the outside.
Right.
So, I mean, I think that just gets real touchy there, and I know people have different views on it, and I know a lot of people, I knew one elder who had a son in prison, and he was an elder. And I know the son was never even a member of the church, but he had no control of him because he was grown, he was in prison. But I have a real problem with that.
Sure. I understand. Yeah, Joshua.
Not to throw a spanner in the works, but yes, some other considerations, right? If he was elected as an elder, or rather appointed as an elder, he would have had to conform to the requirements for eldership, meaning that he must be married to one woman, he must have believing children. A failure to distinguish believing children from non-believing children is very important in the sense of his selection. So supposing he doesn't have believing children, if his children are too little, can we say that they're believing? Usually children are not,
Right.
they're still undeveloped
Right.
brain,
Sure.
right? And that's a given fact, medically speaking. So when we talk about children being believing, currently at the point of his appointment, the children must be believing, you see. But now, supposing those children grow up into adulthood, they get married. One flesh is joined to another flesh. They cleave to each other. The parents, do the parents still are supposed to have control over them? If they do, then they're not cleaving to each other. These are some considerations.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm not taking any position or anything. I just want everyone to know that.
Right.
But these are some things to consider before coming to a final decision.
It's clearly a difficult situation and lots of aspects to it to take into account. And this is why I say I would, if I were in this position one way or the other, I would have to submit to the eldership on it. And if they felt that it was time for me to step down for that reason, I would have to do so without any further question. Because I understand these positions, I understand these views.
Brother John, Joshua and I had that same discussion on this topic when he brought the lesson on Sunday, and we had that very discussion on that topic, and he raised those very issues. And similarly, what Sister Mary said, I was sharing those same things with Brother Joshua at the time. We said, how can you rule the church if you cannot have control over your immediate family and extended family? So it's, as she said, it's a very thin line.
Yeah.
Where do you stand?
Yep, I agree.
Yeah, that's true.
Any other questions, comments? All right, let's take a look. Well, we've already really discussed verses 4 and 5, but let's read them anyway. One who rules his own house well, having his children in submission with all reverence. For if a man does not know how to rule his own house, how will he take care of the church of God? You know, we've discussed how there's perhaps a little lack of clarity on this matter, but if there's nothing else that we can draw from this, one thing that should be very clear is that Paul makes it clear that men are to be leaders of the home as well as the church. There shouldn't be any question about that. And having the experience of having children in submission who are reverent is good practice. It's a good testing ground before a man becomes an elder where he has responsibility over a much larger flock. And reading on in verse 6, it says, "Not a novice, lest being puffed up with pride, he fall into the same condemnation as the devil. Moreover, he must have a good testimony among those who are outside, lest he fall into reproach and the snare of the devil." So if someone were, if a man were very new to a congregation or new to the church, and that man was suddenly appointed as an elder, then unfortunately for a lot of men, that would be a temptation to feel puffed up. Oh, look, I've only been here a month and I've already been promoted to or been appointed as an elder. And so unfortunately, a lot of men are going to feel sort of an elevation of pride as a result. So it's important that that an elder be someone who's not new to the faith, and I would say even new to a congregation. Now, what does that mean in terms of newness? There again, that's where discretion has to be exercised by the existing eldership. Paul doesn't say that a man needs to have been a member of the church for X number of years. That's just not specified. And moreover, must have a good testimony among those who are on the outside. So in other words, if we are, if we don't have a good reputation, so to speak, among those who are outside the church, then that's a poor reflection on the church itself. Now, on the other hand, we have to remember that if we're really, truly Christians, and if we're really living our lives according to the scriptures, there are going to be people who are unhappy with us. Is that not right? Because if we are sharing the gospel and if we're speaking the truth, that's going to make some people unhappy. So when it says that he must have a good testimony among those who are on the outside, that means that we have to be careful about if a complaint is lodged against an elder, what is that complaint? That's the question that has to be asked. If the complaint is that the elder is spreading the gospel, well, that's a good problem to have. Yes, Marie.
I'm going to embarrass you, John.
No.
Because where I worked before retirement, you were one of the clients at the company for which I worked for.
Oh.
And I was talking to your advisor one day, and he made the comment, he is the most humble, gracious person that I know. And I thought, I need to tell John that, but I never could remember that to tell you that he said that. And I thought, you know, and I told him, I said, yes, I go to church with him. He is a very humble, wonderful person. He's a God-fearing person, and he tries to do what's right in all situations. So I just wanted to tell you that, now that you're appropriately embarrassed.
Okay, thank you. And next time you can share that with me in private.
Not so humble.
Yeah. So, but you know what this says, however, applies to all of us, right? All of us should have the same kind of good testimony with those on the outside of the church, so that we can be effective in our evangelism. This is one of those things that I think applies to all of us, you know, regardless of our whether we're men or women and so forth. Yes, Antoinette.
I wanted to ask a question. Can there be a break in serving as an elder? Like, can you be discharged and reappointed? Can there be a break in that service?
Oh, absolutely. So Antoinette's asking, can there be a break in the service? And I think it would depend on the circumstances, but certainly that can happen. So there are lots of times when men will step down from an eldership for completely legitimate reasons. And so absolutely. We're not, when we become elders, we're not elders for a lifetime necessarily. And so it's not a once an elder, always an elder situation. Okay, any other thoughts or comments before we talk about deacons?
I think that, in the role of an elder, that, anybody that's considering that opportunity, the part of being involved with each and every member, it's not a job. It's not a job. It's not, you have to do that.
It's a calling.
It's a calling. And the amount of emotional, mental, physical responsibility that comes with that is tremendous. And I admire you and Mike, the way that y'all do this. And that's something that we should all have that mindset.
We should all, exactly. Thank you, Andy.
We pour ourselves into one another to encourage them, to lift them up, to push them to be stronger in their faith. And I just thought that's important to say that.
Yeah, thank you, Andy. Yeah, Andy points out that it may appear as if we have double standards in the church. And to some extent, perhaps that's true, that we have very high expectations for our leadership. And I think we should have very high expectations. The elders have to pour themselves into the individuals, into the flock. We can't watch over the flock if we're disconnected or if we're distant or if we're not approachable or anything like that. We've got to be fully invested in the congregation spiritually, emotionally, financially, physically. But Andy's right, absolutely, that this is something that we should all be trying to do. We should all be engaged with one another. And I'm convinced that the better the job we do of that, the more people on the outside will want to become part of the church. They'll see that and they'll say, I want that. I see how those people are living, how they treat one another, how they're hospitable to one another, how they love on one another, and I want part of that. So the expectation certainly is higher for the leadership, and I think that's fine. I don't have any objection to that at all, but it's still something that we should all aspire to. So we understand from the scriptures that the elders are expected to have the responsibility of the spiritual matters of the church. Deacons, on the other hand, have the role of being servants. And so let's keep that in mind as we read here about the qualifications of deacons. Likewise, deacons must be reverent, not double-minded, not given to much wine, not greedy for money, holding the mystery of the faith with a pure conscience. So we see a lot of the same expectations, a lot of the same qualifications or requirements of deacons. That deacons too must be reverent and not double-tongued. Again, not given over to wine, not greedy for money. We know that both elders and deacons are going to have contact with the church funds. They can have responsibility over the church funds. The elders have the responsibility, but the deacons are going to be involved in the church funds as they serve the church. And so if a man is greedy or is tempted by money, then that man is probably not going to be a reliable elder or deacon. And it tells us in verse 9, holding the mystery of the faith with a pure conscience. And so, likewise, same for elders as well. We have to be able to have that faith with a clean conscience. Joshua, I think you were about to say something.
Yeah, that even though the deacons are entrusted with the responsibility of taking care of the material aspects of the church, everything has to go through the elders, the hands of the elders. In other words, for example, there's a case in the book of Acts where the finances, even though they're responsible for the finances, but the finances were sent from one congregation through the hands of the elders to another congregation. So there is no, deacons cannot take the onus upon themselves to determine what to do financially without going through the elders. Everything has to go through the elders.
Okay, thank you. So Joshua reminds us that ultimately elders have responsibility. Deacons have the responsibility of serving, but ultimately that service is under the oversight of the elders. In verse 10, but let these also first be tested, then let them serve as deacons, being found blameless. So again, being found blameless, does that mean sinless? No, of course not. But it means without some kind of a impeachable flaw. And it says, let them be first tested. So in like manner, just the way an elder can't be someone who is very new to the faith or new to the congregation, deacons too have to have some level of experience. They have to be tested first. How much so? The scriptures don't tell us. But it's clear that it's not a good idea to appoint someone as a deacon who is very young or inexperienced. Likewise, reading on in verse 11, likewise their wives must be reverent, not slanderers, temperate, faithful in all things. So this says that deacons, this tells us also that deacons too must be married. And let deacons be the husbands of one wife, ruling their children and their house as well. So very, very similar requirement to those of elders. For those who have served well as deacons obtain for themselves a good standing and great boldness in the faith which is in Christ Jesus. Now here's a question that would pertain to both the deacons and the elders. And I'm surprised that Antoinette didn't ask this question. What if a man has only one child? One child is not plural, right? Well, I would say to that, it's fine if a man has only one child. If I was to ask you, if I was to ask the congregation for all the women who have children to raise their hands, and if a woman with one child raised her hand, would that suggest that that woman was being deceitful? No. We have to be careful about our use of the word children in the plural form. As I said, if I asked you all the women who have children to raise their hands, of course, if you have one child, you'd raise your hand. And so whether it's one child or 10 children or adopted children, it makes no difference.
John,
Yes.
I never heard it said like that. That's a really good way to, and the next line says, and their households well. Well, most people don't have two households. So it's clear that.
Right. That's right. So, although it is referring to deacons, plural.
Right.
So, yeah, that's a good point. Verse 12 refers to deacons, plural. And so if each deacon must have a child, then deacons will have children. We don't need to get hung up on this, I would say.
Yeah.
Exactly. Okay, any other thoughts, comments, questions? Yeah, Zipporah.
Does one have to serve as a deacon, a man has to serve as a deacon in order to be eligible for eldership?
Aha, interesting question. Does a man need to serve as a deacon first prior to becoming an elder? And there's nothing in the scriptures that say that. That has often happened in the past, at least in our congregation. But I think that's just because the expectations for an elder are higher in the sense that they are typically going to be older. And elders, therefore, have more experience. But there's nothing that says that an elder has to have been a deacon previously. Nothing that says that at all. I think it often turns out to be the case. Yes, Joshua.
Let's go back to that elders, the appointment of the elders, right?
Sure.
In the context of it, therefore an overseer, indicating an individual, must be above reproach, the husband of one wife, sober-minded, self-controlled, respectable, hospitable, able to teach, not a drunkard, not violent, but gentle, not quarrelsome, not a lover of the money. He must manage his own household well with all dignity, keeping his children submissive. Would that indicate plurality or in the single child? Because if he's referring to an individual all alone, see, he must manage his own household. Then clearly, children would indicate plurality, because also as an overseer, it's easy to manage one child, but to manage many children is a challenge, because in the church there are many members.
Right.
You're not going to manage one
Sure.
individual. So
Yeah.
I'm just throwing that out.
We'll have to discuss that next Sunday. We're out of time. Saved by the bell. So,
Is that this verse in relation to the
Yeah.
office
So-
itself?
Hmm?
I think it was sent to the
Yeah.
office, which is single.
yeah, so Joshua points out that verse 4 in chapter 3 refers to children, plural, of one elder.
Oh, we know,
So
you
it's
cannot have one elder.
Pardon?
We know that you cannot have one elder. It must always be plural.
Right, there has to be a plurality of elders. But verse 4 refers to his own house,
Children, so.
singular, but then refers to the children, plural. We can come back to that next Sunday, perhaps. We are out of time. The bell did not ring. But we will bear in mind that, that these topics are important, not just in the short run, but in the long run as well. So be thinking on these as we raise up our young men. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, brother.